I wake up at the exact same time every morning here in Scottsdale, usually well before the sun actually breaks over the horizon. There's a very specific, absolute stillness to the desert at 4:45 in the morning. Before the heat begins to bake the asphalt and the noise of the city starts to hum, the environment is just quiet and relentlessly predictable. I have come to deeply appreciate that predictability in my 60s. When you spend the vast majority of your adult life living out of a suitcase as a corporate sales executive, jumping between different time zones, sleeping in hotel beds that all feel vaguely the same, and operating on an unpredictable schedule dictated entirely by client demands, you eventually crave a system that just does exactly what it is supposed to do. You want your infrastructure to be reliable. You want to turn the key and know the engine is going to turn over without hesitation. But I want to talk about a very specific kind of morning predictability that a lot of us lose as we get older, and the profound, heavy silence we maintain when it happens. If you are a man in your 50s or 60s, you already know exactly what I am talking about. For the first 30 or 40 years of your life, waking up in the morning came with a very specific, automatic physical response. It was just a baseline biological reality. You opened your eyes and the system was already fully powered up and standing at attention. It was such a constant, reliable part of the daily routine that you never really thought about it. It was just the machinery doing what the machinery was built to do. Then, somewhere along the line, usually when you cross into your late 40s or early 50s, the routine quietly changes. You wake up, you stare at the ceiling, and you realize the system is completely quiet. The automatic response is just gone. When it first started happening to me, I completely brushed it off. I was in my late 40s, carrying a massive amount of corporate stress, managing a territory that stretched across half the country, and living on terrible airport coffee and pure adrenaline. I woke up one morning in a hotel room in Chicago, realized the morning response was entirely absent, and immediately manufactured a logical excuse. I told myself it was just because I had a late dinner with a client. The next time it happened, I blamed the hotel mattress. Then I blamed the time zone change. Then I simply blamed the fact that I was getting older, convincing myself that the machinery naturally just powers down as you age, and that it was an inevitable, mandatory part of the aging process. I was lying to myself, and I was doing it because the alternative was too terrifying to face. The absolute truth is that the disappearance of that morning physical response is not just a casual, meaningless symptom of getting older. We treat it like it is just a cosmetic issue, something to joke about darkly in our own heads, but it is actually a massive, glaring warning light on the dashboard of your biological infrastructure. For years, I operated without that morning signal, and because I ignored the early warning light, the problem eventually traveled down the line into the hours when I actually needed the machinery to work. The lack of morning response slowly bled into a lack of response during intimacy. When you are with your partner and your body simply refuses to engage the hydraulics that have worked flawlessly your entire life, the shame is absolutely suffocating. I did not know how to talk about it with my wife at the time. Instead of having an honest conversation about a mechanical failure, I built a massive wall of avoidance. I started working later. I stayed downstairs reading emails until I knew she was asleep. I let a massive cold distance grow between us, simply because I was terrified of facing the reality that my body felt completely broken. I am not saying a lack of blood flow was the sole reason my first marriage ended, but the silence, the shame, and the absolute refusal to look under the hood definitely helped tear the foundation apart. It was only after I hit absolute rock bottom, sitting alone in a rented apartment after the divorce, that I finally decided to stop ignoring the failing gauges and actually look at the logistics of what was happening to my body. I approached it the same way I used to approach a failing sales quarter. I needed to understand the raw data. I needed to know how the manufacturing plant actually operated. What I discovered completely dismantled every single excuse I had been telling myself for a decade. I started reading up on the mechanics of sleep and male biology, ignoring the superficial articles and looking at the actual functional data. I always assumed that a morning erection was just the random result of having a highly active imagination or a specific kind of dream right before waking up. I thought it was completely tied to sexual thoughts. But I learned that it is actually a deeply ingrained, completely normal part of fundamental male physiology. The medical term for it is nocturnal penile tumescence, and it is essentially an automated diagnostic test that your body runs while you are unconscious. These automated tests happen primarily during a very specific stage of your sleep cycle, which is the REM sleep phase. This is the phase of sleep where the brain is highly active and where you tend to dream the most. Because your longest and deepest periods of REM sleep typically occur in the early morning hours, right before you naturally wake up. That is precisely why you usually open your eyes to find the system fully engaged. You're waking up right in the middle of, or immediately after, a scheduled maintenance run. When I looked at the numbers, I realized how incredibly active this system is supposed to be. When we are young, when we are teenagers, the system is essentially running at absolute peak capacity. The diagnostic checks are frequent and they last an incredibly long time. An average episode during that age can last about 40 minutes, meaning that for almost 40% of a young man's entire sleep time, the internal plumbing is fully pressurized and testing the lines. I told myself that because I was in my 50s, my system was just naturally supposed to be quiet. But the data proved me entirely wrong. Researchers have been studying this specific biological function for a very long time, going all the way back to a major study done in 1975. They hooked men of all ages up to machines in sleep labs, measuring brain waves and physical responses, just to establish a clear baseline of what a normal, healthy male machine is supposed to do in the dark. The data showed that after you exit your teenage years, the automated system does decrease its activity slightly, leveling off to occupy about 20% of your total sleep time. But that still equates to roughly an hour and a half of total pressurized testing every single night. Even as an adult, a healthy, functioning man is supposed to experience somewhere between 3 to 5 distinct episodes of full physical response while he is completely asleep. I tried to rationalize this by telling myself that maybe I just wasn't getting enough REM sleep anymore because I was older and stressed. But again, the logistics proved me wrong. The research clearly indicates that the amount of REM sleep you get actually stays remarkably consistent well past your teenage years. Most adult men continue to get about 100 minutes of REM sleep every single night, which is plenty of time for the diagnostic system to run its necessary checks. The window of opportunity was there. My machinery was just refusing to fire. The absolute hardest thing for me to read, the piece of data that forced me to stop making excuses, was a much more recent study that specifically looked at how these nighttime mechanics change with age. They took healthy men ranging all the way from 20 years old up to 60 years old, men who had no underlying sleep issues, no existing sexual dysfunction, and who were not taking medications that altered their system. They monitored them overnight with specific medical devices designed to measure the frequency and the strength of the system's output. The results were completely undeniable. The study confirmed that these automated nighttime responses occurred in every single age group, no matter how old the men were. The biological factory does not just board up the windows and shut down because you turn 50 or 60. The system is designed to keep running these overnight pressure tests well into your later years. Now, the sheer raw power of the blood flow does naturally decrease as you put more miles on the engine. The data showed that a man in his 20s might see an average blood flow increase to about 268% of his normal baseline, while a healthy man around 50 years old will see an increase to about 200%. The pressure dropped slightly, which makes sense for an older machine, but the men in their 50s were still getting extremely good, highly functional blood flow. And more importantly, the total number of times the system fired up and the length of time it stayed engaged did not significantly change with age. Even the older men were averaging just under 4 complete episodes a night, with their longest and best response lasting an average of 31 solid minutes. These results have been replicated over and over again since the 70s. What this definitively means, and what I had to forcefully accept sitting alone in my apartment, is that as a man, you are biologically supposed to be waking up with that morning predictability, or at least having those automated responses throughout the night, well into your later decades of life. If you are waking up every single morning and the system is completely silent, and if you never notice any physical response during the night, it is not because you are old, it is because something in your infrastructure is failing. I finally understood that the morning response is not just about intimacy. It is a critical, highly sensitive biomarker. It is the ultimate indicator of your overall health. When you are experiencing strong, reliable nighttime responses, it is a definitive biological sign that you have excellent unrestricted blood flow moving throughout your entire body. It means that your hormonal health is stable and that your nervous system is firing perfectly, because all of those complex systems absolutely need to be fully intact and communicating with each other for the blood to successfully reach the end of the line. When the blood is not getting to the destination during the night, it is a glaring, unavoidable signal that something else in your internal environment is severely compromised. For a lot of men, and this was exactly the case for me, the complete absence of that morning response is the very first domino to fall. It is a precursor. It is a great way to identify the internal traffic jam long before it becomes a massive, undeniable problem. You lose the overnight diagnostics first. Then eventually you start noticing the heavy changes in your physical response when you are awake, when you actually want to engage, and the system just refuses to pressurize. This is also a massive indicator of the fuel level in your primary tank. The automated overnight system is heavily correlated with your raw testosterone levels. When a man's primary fuel starts to burn out, when the testosterone plummets, one of the very first operational systems to quietly shut down is the nighttime diagnostic test. I had been waiting for the problem to fix itself, but you cannot fix a broken dashboard gauge by simply ignoring it. I had to rebuild the entire foundation of my physical life. The first thing I did, and the first thing any man should do when the morning response vanishes, is go to a doctor and demand a comprehensive check of your testosterone levels. I did not want to lecture about aging. I wanted to see the exact numbers on my biological spreadsheet. If the primary fuel is low, nothing else in the factory is going to run correctly. But beyond the fuel, I had to look at the massive amount of damage I had done to my own pipes. I had to completely optimize my internal blood flow and my overall health, which meant abandoning the excuses I had relied on for years. I could no longer live on airport lounge food and expect my vascular system to remain elastic. I had to get my weight down to a manageable, healthy baseline to take the unnecessary pressure off the system. I changed the way I moved. I stopped relying on the stress of my job to keep my heart rate up. I forced myself to start exercising with actual intention every single week. I incorporated heavy resistance training, lifting actual weights to force my body to demand more oxygen and naturally boost my hormonal profile, alongside consistent aerobic exercise to physically clear the internal traffic jams and optimize the blood flow. I also had to learn how to actively manage the massive corporate stress that was constantly telling my blood vessels to constrict, and I had to become fiercely disciplined about my sleep schedule. You cannot expect your body to run an hour and a half of vital diagnostic testing if you are only giving it 4 hours of alcohol-interrupted sleep. All of these deliberate, quiet daily actions work together to systematically improve your circulation, your overall genital health, and the complete function of your biological machinery. By the time I met Alyssa, my second wife, I had spent a couple of years doing this unglamorous, heavy maintenance work on myself. Alyssa is an ex-interior design consultant, 9 years younger than me, and she possesses a level of direct, unwavering honesty that completely disarms all of my old corporate defense mechanisms. Early in our relationship, we had a morning where I woke up and the system was just a little sluggish. The old panic flared up in my chest instantly. The old urge to hide, to make an excuse, to blame a bad night of sleep was right there on the tip of my tongue. But I stopped myself. I looked at her, and I just told her the truth. I told her that I spent a decade ignoring my health, that I had let the machinery break down, and that I was still in the process of rebuilding the infrastructure. I told her that my system wasn't perfect, but that I was actively working on it. She didn't pity me, she didn't judge me, she just appreciated the fact that I was finally taking ownership of the machine I lived in. What begins in the body usually ends in the head. When you stop hiding the mechanical failure, the mental tension drops immediately. And when the mental tension drops, the physical vessels actually have a chance to relax and open up. I still have days where the engine feels a little heavy. I am 63 years old, and I am not pretending to have the vascular elasticity of a 20-year-old, but the morning predictability is back. The system runs its checks. The dashboard lights are green. I look at my son Ethan a lot these days. He is 31, grinding his way up the ladder in commercial real estate. He works brutal hours, lives on caffeine, barely sleeps, and completely takes his physical infrastructure for granted. He thinks he is invincible because his body still absorbs the punishment without complaining. I know exactly how he feels because I lived in that exact same state of arrogant denial. I do not lecture him, but I do tell him to pay attention to his own internal gauges. I tell him that the body will tolerate abuse for a long time, but eventually the diagnostic systems will start shutting down. A lot of men walking around right now are not fundamentally broken. They are just incredibly ignorant of how their own machinery operates, and they are aggressively ignoring the wrong things. We spend our 50s waiting way too long to face what has changed, pretending that silence is a valid strategy for dealing with a biological failure. Do not treat the disappearance of that morning signal as a joke, and do not treat it as an inevitable surrender to old age. Take it exactly for what it is. It is your body's direct, undeniable way of telling you precisely what is going on beneath the surface. It is a signal to stop making excuses, to take a hard inventory of your daily habits, and to do the necessary work to improve your overall health before the entire engine block cracks. Get your blood moving. Lift something heavy. Fix your sleep. Stop running your primary tank on empty. Confidence is not a mindset. Confidence returns when your body actually starts to respond predictably again. The sun is fully up now here in the desert, and the heat is already starting to radiate off the pavement. I have a long walk to take and a lot of maintenance left to do on this machine today. Do not ignore the warning lights. Take care of your infrastructure. We will talk again soon.